one thing that came up I've got to ask. We've heard various things, again, on nitrogen per bushel of corn. What should that be in this region when you have corn? You have water to do.
So I guess that's kind of loaded, two different things.
Sure.
Uptake, plan on 1 to 1.2 pound in per bushel produced. So it depends on your management style, when it's going out, how, when, where, and how. Depends on product too. If it's going out early, your efficiency is not going to be near as good. So guys that are mainly applying close to the season or in season, I see a lot of stuff that can get down there in a 0.8 pound of in per bushel applied as far as what they're applying. But there's probably a lot of efficiencies that aren't near that good when you got product going out in the fall and in the spring beforehand, what'd you say?
Yes, sir.
Or-
I would say so. Yeah, there's a lot of data through the years, especially some of the data that Pioneer put out, suggesting that 0.8. But again, that went back to multiple forms. They're looking at anhydrous plus 32, plus potentially some ammonium sulfate. They're looking at multiple different methods, multiple forms, multiple timings on it. So, there's some trade-offs there. Like I say, at 1.2, if you're front loading it pretty heavy, that's probably a fair number. If you're going to manage it through the season and you're going to be right on with your timing, 0.8, and even on the South Plains with some different forms, I've seen 0.5, 0.7.
So I have some
Fairly
stuff.
consistent.
Yeah, I have some stuff in our program that was as low as 0.4 this year, and then we're just measuring residual and then applying as crop needs it. So management is important. That crop is still going to uptake 1.2 to 1.3, maybe even slightly below, depending on the variety and how good this technology is. So it's still going to take that pound of in per bushel to get there, but there's various ways that, various sources of nitrogen coming into that plant. It's not all just what you apply necessarily.
Well, we found that one is what we budget for,
Mm-hmm.
and then in-season tissue samples and soil samples may dictate us to, there's been a lot of years 0.8 is kind of where we come in on. We do a split treatment strip till to get to 120 pounds on corn, strip till and whatever we need over the top of manure and carryover to get to 120, and then the rest is all fertigation. And we do try to save 30 to 40 pounds over at tassel, and that'll depend on what the crop's looking like, what we put on there and there. So
The thing about split time in your application is it gives you the ability to react. So if you just front load it all up there, it's all out there. You've already spent those dollars. So if you push it off further into the season, while logistically it may be a pain, or from that instance, labor, pumps, that's all a big problem. It can really, timing is, really affects everything. So if you're having a bad season, you're burning up, well, maybe it gives you the opportunity to peel back. If you're having a good season and plenty of rainfall, you can push it a little bit. Maybe you want a little more fertility out there for a better reacting crop.
So if you lay off the fertilizer at the beginning of the crop, you're gonna be able to cut it using some of the liquid. How much more expensive is the liquid per unit at the end?
So lately it's been running a little bit cheaper on whatever this urea's price at this point in time spread. Sometimes it's the reverse of that. It just kind of depends on demand, supply, and what's going on with these silly fertilizer companies. As we all know, it's generally higher than lower of late. So
Do you do much of the deeper nitrogen soil samples, or do you just do the upper more?
So in our business, we're checking down to 2 foot, nearly 20 inches, and we are measuring and accounting for that. I don't know what y'all do on farm. Do you do?
we selectively do some 2-foot samples, and after we've managed down, we used to be at a 1.2 to 1.3, and after we've cut back to never being over 1 per bushel planned anyway, depending on what your yield is. But our second foot, no longer, there's a lot of carryover in it after we've done.
So that's a good point. Once your management has gotten a little bit more improved, hadn't maybe necessarily over fertilizer, had plenty out there for some time, your bank is going to be depleted.
Right.
So there's really less of a need to check to that 2 foot area. But if you are making that switch, or you're just kind of wondering, it's real good to check that next foot.
Well, to me, a lot of it comes down to, are you looking at cotton behind corn
Mm-hmm.
and banking on some of that deeper nitrogen for that cotton plant? That's something that's pretty important. and looking towards that. You know, the other thing with corn or sorghum, you've got to think about where 90% of your root mass is at, and is that, you know, 2 foot and down even attainable for those plants timely?
Right.
So, but that, I mean, once that nitrogen is in the soil, changes that nitrate form, it moves with the water. So it's coming back, it's gonna move mass flow either way. So it'll come in whether you want it to or not. So potentially if it's there. But because we are deficit irrigating in this country, some of you guys may be a little bit further east, may be a little more fortunate, but pretty much this whole area, like everything, has gotten to be pretty deficit.
We're talking about fertilization. Any questions for them on that? We're getting some pretty good answers here. Okay, soil health. Move that. How are you handling that? I think, Landon, you got some things to say about that.
Well, I've spent a little time on the soil health side of things. I was fortunate enough to come present last year on microalgae and what it does in relation to biology in the soil, and you know, the carbon content in the soil and a number of other things. So, you know, to me, the soil health standpoint, it's all about balance. You know, it's about you know, not only the nutrient balance of the soil, but also that biological balance. What antagonisms are you facing? You know, is it a high salt soil? Is it a high pH soil? You know, there's a lot of things that can influence what happens. And also, you know, fungi, bacteria, microalgae, they're all serving similar purposes in, you know, making nutrients available to the plant. So, you know, there's a lot of redundancy in those systems. So, you know, again, it's important to have that balance there and understand, you know, more about what's going on. The trouble with so much of this, you know, the fertility data, a lot of that goes back to the 50s. Now, granted, some of that 50 data is probably not real good. We've got a lot newer data, but the data set that we have with fertility is massive. A lot of this that's just now starting to be well understood from a soil health, from a biological standpoint, that data is only 10 or 15 years old tops. So there's even a new concept. I say it's a new concept. I really hadn't heard much about it until digging into some stuff this year. But looking at biology that's on the plant leaves and the interaction with that biology in the plant and how it influences, you know, stomatal regulation and other functions in the plant. So I look forward to being more documents, more studies coming out with some of that as well in the future.
Well, having history many years back is because whatever you're doing, the movements you're making are so slight. The only way you're going to see anything that's meaningful to you is looking at multiple years back. Because we've been using compost and manure on pretty heavily for 10 to 15 years. We got history from every one of those years, and you can see improvement there. But one shot, 1 year, you're not ever going to see it.
No.
And that's not a every year application, but every other year, just about every other year goes on 10 ton of feedlot manure or 2 ton of compost, but you know, 5 years in that kind of program is the first time you really see anything start to pump. You really level out your phosphorus levels in the soil, and we just try to maintain. Don't really ever put anything else on any commercials, and then. But the thing I've seen and I've watched is the percentage of organic matter has come up from in the 1.3s, 1.4s to a little over 2, and then maybe it took between 5 and 10 years to do that.
Do you feel like you see those higher nitrogen use efficiencies on those fields where you've had that management practice?
Yes, I believe we have, and you know, making sure you credit manure correctly is something that a lot of people. I feel like it gets more credit for nitrogen than it should because of the way it releases. You don't get it. Most time, if you put it on front of corn, you're not going to get it till either the very tail end, or if at all. A lot of times, and wheat, if you put it in front of wheat, we never see that bump until the next crop.
Correct.
And but in cotton, you know, you can you can see, we don't have to fertilize hardly any cotton because we're behind manure applications that'll have nitrogen readily available for them. And the cotton's really good at mining, you know, it goes and gets what it needs, so.
And when you're applying organic material like that, but in my opinion, by far manure compost are some of the better soil amendments you can make, probably the most bang for your buck in a number of areas. You know, we're talking about soil health here. From a biological perspective, think about all the biological activity that's coming out of that ruminant material, just naturally occurring. But from an instance of release, to get that stuff to start metabolizing, break down, not only do you have to get your carbon to N ratio back even Steven before you're going to see some nitrogen release, but you also have to have some moisture and some heat to start to break down that material. And so that's why you can see that a little bit. It really doesn't show up till later in the season. Curtis is right. Most of the stuff we check in season, you don't see that stuff turn loose till we really aren't picking that up till tassel time. So from a soil health perspective, I think Landon's right, some balance. I think you got to give with anything on this practice-wise. It's not what a guy wants to hear. A guy wants immediate results. But anything in this part of the country, 3, 5, even upwards of 10 years, sometimes it just takes time to know. I mean, our climate is so variable. We know we're going to be hot and dry at some point, and usually most of the time. But but we do have quite a bit of variation season to season. That's why that irrigation really helps with a lot of that, right? So I think it's loaded from a soil health perspective. I don't think it's just biological. I think it comes down to some chemical and physical properties as well. So some other things you got, you can't take everything off that ground and expect it to give something back to you, biologically or from a soil health perspective if you've just mined the hell out of it. So you got to put some stuff back. You got to give it some cover, some moisture before it'll start giving back to you.
So forage production,
Yeah.
we have seen actual diminish in our numbers when we started growing for the dairy. Everything, all crop residues go off, and then your benefits are not there. So you're gonna have to look at applying more to get back even. And
Well, a lot of that is you're taking away a food source for the biology, for that residue.
yeah.
But then the other thing, you're likely a little bit more aggressive with tillage on that because of all the compaction from the choppers and trucks and everything else. And with that tillage, you are selecting biology because, your more complex forms of biology, that tillage is going to destroy them. And I'm not sitting here saying no till is the answer by any means. There's a time to till, and there's a time to, let it rest. But we just need to know what our payoffs and our penalties are with a lot of the actions we're taking. And, just that, I see it on the South Plains a lot where it's almost recreational tillage because it's, I got to bed up. I got, to do things a certain way. And I get it. There's a time and a place for that. It's just know that there's expense associated with that beyond just your fuel and time.
It's kind of like all things. If you take, you got to give it back eventually. So, yeah, moisture cover, residual, some steward. If somebody came and bulldozed your house down every year, you probably wouldn't necessarily thrive either. And that's kind of how I envision soil aggregates or aggregation in the soil. And so that's those particulates and how compacted or how much more space, how much more porous they are, and then how that biology interacts. So that no-till isn't always the answer. Strip-till, minimal-till definitely has its place. We all watched the country blow away yesterday. It'll blow away again today, and it'll blow away again tomorrow. It's like, what are we doing to help manage some of those instances?
Hey, that kind of led me into my next question on tillage systems. Would you folks recommend what combination, or has it worked for you? Different types.
We found, from what I've seen, we have to be combinations of whatever, because you can't just, it's not a cookie cutter deal. We farm all over the northern panhandle, and I can no-till and be very successful around Sunray, Stratford, Eder. But as we move east, the soil, the percolation rate is slower. You can't, and that it seals up on you. There's more, you're pumping more salt over there too. And so tillage is still something we do. We try to leave as much trash as possible for sure. But we've had our yields increased well over cost of tillage, starting to do more tillage east of here, which would be from Spearman all the way to Booker, Follett, there's that area.
Through strip tilling or?
We do, there's some full conventional tillage over there. We strip till
Real stuff.
also, but we, over the years, we were no-tilling exclusively for several years, and our yields there just nosedived. And for one thing, that stuff is so tight, you can't get any oxygen in the soil, and it would waterlog on us, because it drains slow as well as percolates slow. And then the other thing you have is if you're growing 250 corn and no-tilling one year after the other in that, you start to no-till and try to plant it in 2 to 3 years worth of track, because you get years like this and nothing breaks down. And so we had to start doing some residue management, and you know we still no-till considerably around here, but there's a lot of strip till too. It's a multifaceted approach, because you gotta tailor it to your field and your farm.
Yeah, I would agree. It's somewhat dependent on your particular situation. We all know weeds are trouble from time to time too. I think a good rotation is important. Putting some trash back at some point in time. So if you are slicking it off, you do got cotton crop, sunflower, whatever, you know, make sure you got a grain in that rotation, and then a little bit of balance. So I like to see rotation with some strip till. If you're trying to get that broke back up because you've got some traffic, or you're trying to put some nutrients back, that's by far the best practice in my mind. But it is somewhat dependent.
Well, and it's, again, it goes back to what's your limiting factor. Do we have a compaction zone that's causing us issues? Do we have an issue like Curtis mentioned that, man, the soil just can't get oxygen, so I've got to open it up. Some guys I've worked with for a long time, they're unhappy. They do a lot of strip till under pivot, and that's worked well for them, but they're also doing some inter-row ripping, and it may be 1 year out of 7 or 1 year out of 5 that they'll come in there and inter-row rip. But on their non-irrigated acres down there, ripping is commonplace. It's not, they don't set out to rip it every single year, but it may be 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 5, just depending on what's needed in order to enable that water to get down and oxygen to get down in the soil.
As we continue to see some of these areas be deficit, or we continue to see this water goes, I think that trash is the residue is going to be a big factor going forward. And it's not really a matter of how do we, it's like, what do we do with this trash? We got to do something with it, get it to go somewhere. It's more of how do we manage this trash, for our benefit? How do we figure out, the trash isn't the problem. How do you figure out to farm with it, in my opinion, on, everything over here west for sure.
Soil tests, how often, or do you do them, or?
We do it every year, at least once a year. Like right now, we've got some cattle on some stalks and stuff. We soil tested before. We're gonna soil test after. We wanna know what changed, if anything,
Or the fertilizer you're adding work?
yeah, we'll see what happens there. But just trying to more understand the system to be able to scale it. I mean, it's small right now, and I think animal agriculture is going to need to be in this. We just got to figure out how to scale it and do it where you don't break financially you can handle it. So.
Yeah, annually, once a year, same time of the year is real important, and some of that has to go back to moisture level and everything. But to benchmark a good sample annually, it needs to be at the same time of the year. You can change it up different times of the year. It can kind of be hard to peg some of those trends. That laboratory analysis and that plant extractants they're using, that's not a perfect process. And so while it's better than not, that it's something to consider that it's not. None of that whole system is perfect, but once a year, annually for sure. And then I'm a big proponent of checking your nitrogen really at any point close to the growing season, depending on how you're doing your fertilizer application.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, the timing is really critical, because that was a lot of the issue I had with some of the data with the microalgae was, if you don't know where you're at in that cycle, because all these nutrients are cycling throughout the growing season. So if you're always sampling the same time of the year, then wherever you are in that cycle, at least you're getting consistent readings. Because, I mean, you would have to sample monthly to really track out what that cycle is doing. And, you know, it's gonna be expense prohibitive.
Definitely once you start getting warmer and wetter, or you're introducing irrigation, some stuff is definitely going to start to change as you start to see some more metabolization breakdown. From the animal side, animals on the field, you're only adding nutrients to that field by cycling that system faster, in my opinion. So you're just taking that residue, running it through the animal and breaking it down quicker, making it more available sooner compared to that residue, being there and breaking down naturally. And so you're more cycling that process than you are really adding to it. You're just making it work for you quicker.
I have a question. When would be the best time for the annual soil test?
Done some in the fall, done some this time of year, when they were in that annual cycle. And that's a little bit more of a South Plains lean on it, so that's more cotton acres.
I would always lean late in the fall, early winter, or you can do some in the spring, but a little earlier in the spring. But I like late fall, early winter best. So before the end of the year.
We particularly try to pull all ours right after we harvest in the fall.
The only thing I've seen that's a little bit funky when you get close to harvest is sometimes that potassium level can be a little bit weird. We're normally naturally high in potassium in this part of the world, so it's normally not a consideration, an issue. But I have seen some instances where we are pushing it up real close to harvest, where our potassium levels show pretty low parts per million wise in the soil compared to what we normally see. And then you come back later and check it a little bit after, and you're wondering what the lab did wrong. But that potassium is just tied up in that root system a little bit. And sometimes it can be moisture related as well, which is kind of why guys got away from like a Barris or an EC sled a little bit in this part of the world too. Wetter, drier soils can affect that potassium level quite a bit.
On like potassium. I think I've farmed here for 35 years. I've put potassium on 2
Yeah.
fields. And the whole time I've been here.
Normally potassium's only an issue on fields that have been hayed or chopped and nothing's been put back for quite some time. There's a lot that leaves in that process when you got the whole crop leaving. And so if you don't put it back, it will deplete. But in a lot of those instances, guys are trading for manure or going back with the manure anyway, in almost every case nowadays. So
Soil type drives a little bit more of that going south. I mean, it can be extremely variable depending on your phosphorus and potassium needs down there when you get into,
tighter, lighter soil.
the chalkier
Yeah.
dirt and stuff,
I was in Quail Headley area when I was growing up, and we did a lot of potassium, a lot. But it was deep, poor sands.
Oh, yeah, a lot of sand over there.
Let's go on with manure as a natural fertilizer. Do you prefer that, or
I prefer
building
manure.
organic matter?
I prefer manure over compost too, because of the microbial action in manure. I don't think it depends on who manages compost if they do a good job. Because if they let it get too dry, the microbial action out of compost is not what it should be. And it's, guys, that's kind of on the back burner for most of these guys that do compost. That's kind of sometimes it gets watered and stirred during the summer, and sometimes it doesn't. And
I think that goes back to consistency for all of it, where it's come from, where it started, how it originated, one way or the other. You'll definitely see a little bit more end benefit out of the manure than you will compost. A lot of that's burned off during that composting process. Not that there's not anything in it. There's potentially just sometimes less. But I think it's important to be getting, if those piles are coming to the side of your field after they've been brought there, I think it's always important to get a sample out of there to make sure you're getting what you actually think you're getting, almost in every case. Whoever you're getting that from may tell you a little bit different, but I've just seen too much variation over the years, and that $80 manure or compost test is pretty cheap. And then at least you have an idea what actually went on and or what you're buying. So
we had a line of manure this year that they had pulled lagoon dirt in, and there was probably 30% nutrient level in that stack of manure or compost than one that had not been.
30% less?
30% less.
Yeah.
And,
No.
Well, and two, I mean, the term compost is thrown around a lot, and you could get in an instance where it's twice termed manure,
Yeah.
essentially, and they're still calling it compost, and that's very different from a truly finished compost. So it's just important to know your supplier on that, what they're doing, what their standards are. Some of them will even offer you the results, and it's routine throughout their process.
just some good transparency and asking more questions less is always good when you're spending money, I think, so.
Okay, let's move on to the big question. Unless somebody else has got something on these topics we've just been covering. Yes. Drives me nuts, it's driven me nuts over the last 20 years. Cover crops. Yes, no, what? If you do it.
Right, yes,
Do-
in certain instances, but as far as, I mean, our results on farm that we see, what they just posted up here about, that's what we see too. There's either not a benefit or such a slight benefit that you can't recoup it. But I still think the animal part of that would probably improve that. I mean, I'm a big fan of it behind weedlage, because they don't leave enough trash there. We do a lot of barley behind weedlage. It works really well. It doesn't take a lot of moisture. It winter kills on its own because we plant spring barley normally. I mean, this year it didn't because it was not cold. But
That barley can be kinda hard to kill, right?
it can be, once you get it dinged, it really is. And so it's, but I don't see without animals coming in, because our crops come off late enough, it doesn't get established, just like they said on the slide, till in the spring. And, or if it doesn't get rain, you have to either water it or just be okay with it doesn't, it's not coming. And so your window that it's there is so short. Most years, it's really hard to see a benefit in it.
What about a cover crop, like on corn, sprayed on, or drums, or
So
where
then
you
the-
get a good stand where you can graze, or it will cover the ground?
I've not had a good experience with a stand on that. We've done it several times with it was never a drone, but I did it with a helicopter and an airplane. And I think if your soil top was right and you had enough trash, you would probably get a decent stand. But if that top inch dries fairly quickly, and at the end of the season, you all know we all are looking for the end.
Yeah.
And so we just didn't have a lot of luck with a stand.
We did it for a few years back, 90s, you know, and the stand wasn't a perfect stand, but it was good, I mean, good enough to cover it all, you know, and heck, when you come out of the weed or whatever, it's, you know, you can turn cattle right behind the combine, I mean, just.
Well, I will say the helicopter did a
Better
better
than-
job.
Do you think that's because it pushed it more down into the canopy
That's
towards
the
the
only
ground?
thing is your leaves.
Yeah. I think the
Deflected so
helicopter,
much
the rotor wash
To some
got
ex-
it to the ground.
To some extent, trash in the bottom of that row, holding that stuff up, keeping it from seed soil contact
Right.
is the biggest. The thing, seed soil contact, and then moisture. I've just like Kurt, I've seen it work some years, and I've seen it not work other years.
Yeah.
And some years, you know, it might work for one guy, might not for the other. I think there's some varying factors and
Just
conditions.
like a cover
It's-
crop, I
it's-
mean, it's a hit and a miss deal, you gotta figure out what it is that year.
Kind of like what Curtis mentioned from a cover perspective. I think that definitely has a place in our part of the world when we're chopping or haying and it's completely bare versus when we got some residue and then your timing in that. I think probably cover crop behind chopped wheat or something that's going to be more summer into the fall is obviously going to be a lot better performer than something later in the fall, because it seems like by the time you get it up and doing what it needs to be doing,
time to kill
you're
it.
killing it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
The biggest benefit we've ever had is like by either hailed out or blown out crop of some kind. We had some really good growth on some cover crop over at Farnsworth this year, but we got our cotton hailed out.
Yeah.
And we planted it in first part of August, and that was a multi-species. Really looked like it did a heck of a job. We didn't put a lot of water into it, but again, it pulled the soil. I had a good 3-foot profile on it because it rained in the summer, but it lived for so long, it's pulled the top feed 2 feet out.
Yeah, that's what, another thing on cover. You're trying to get your pre-water, but you're sucking it out with your cover. And I mean, during the summer, like you say, when you get hailed out, that's better than having weeds come in there.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You know,
Some good healthy competition, and I think to some extent when you're so bare anyway, on those situations where you are bare or held out, you had a failed crop, you know, for the there's a lot of that moisture, at least in that top foot anyway, that's gonna get wicked out anyhow. So would you rather just give that back to the environment, or would you try to do something to capture that? That's one of the arguments to be made, in my opinion. Now, how you manage that further on, that's kind of more up, kind of more on you if you've let it, if it's gotten away from you a little bit. And probably in this case, Curtis instance, if we'd have probably had a normal freeze, it probably wouldn't have gotten near the moisture, but that stuff probably didn't die till damn near December.
No, it didn't. Well, some of it didn't.
Still is.
I mean,
yeah.
the
Depending
radishes.
on what it is.
The radishes, I was in it after we strip tilled through it, and there's a lot of the radishes are still alive. That was last week. And
Which probably to some instance you're not that mad about.
no, the radishes and turnips, to me, are just a little bomb of moisture and nutrients waiting to explode.
Yeah, because they're still holding that moisture there.
And they're very quick to deteriorate through the season.
And I would say that's probably, of all the things that would go into the fall, if you're planting wheat early back, that's probably one of the things that I think guys have liked the best and got the most value out of, or felt like they got the most value out of.
Turnips and radishes.
Whether it's from a grazing
And
standpoint
ryegrass.
or from a nutrient pool and breaking up that, shallow horizon a little
Yeah,
bit
because
for
they
you.
split that
Mhm.
ground up
I
there.
know one thing, that blend had sun hemp in it. I will not ever plant that again.
Now, you can't kill it, can you?
No, well, it died, but it turns into rope. And,
Oh, yeah.
and it was, we had our trash rippers, I don't know how many times we took them completely off the strip till rig and pulled them off, pulled all the trash off of them, put them back on. But it was just winding around everything, and that's the first time I'd ever used it, and I won't be using it again. It's a real woody stalk, but once you hit those stalks, it just becomes, it's fibrous and it's just like rope, so.
One thing I have seen work well is kind of letting a crop you're already going and counting on, go ahead and continue to give back to you, is on some of this forage sorghum where guys have shifted that plant date real early. They let it grow up, they get it chopped out early, and then it has time to come back in the fall on some of that moisture. It's going to get some of that moisture, but in some instances, this year it went too long. Normal freeze works best, but if you can get back to, that forage sorghum get back to knee high or whatever, that's an excellent cover, awesome cover going into the winter and the
And
spring.
that used to, you graze it or swath it,
You-
and he'd come back as a fair cover,
So there's several of those things from a sorghum Sudan or Sudan grass or a millet. Several of those things that if by the time you cut it off, you got some regrowth that makes a decent cover. And then like something all those crops there, less of a concern to go back in there with some sort of implement and get it twisted up because it usually just powders all the heck by the time you get to this time of the year or a little bit earlier. So.
The question I've got with it, because I've seen multiple articles pointing at South Dakota and water infiltration rate with the cover crops. And, their soils are, I would say, similar to ours as far as, it takes that water a while from the rain to infiltrate. So it tends to just slick up and run off, and then we've lost the benefit of it. Well, guys, where they've had those multi-species covers, they've seen their infiltration rates skyrocket. So now, if, they got an inch 20 that came in 10 minutes, they've captured the majority of it instead of just slicking up and running off. So, even like that scenario where that top foot's dry right now, but you have all that material that's dying, all those root channels and everything, what does your pre-water look like? Is it a 3/4 inch pass that does the same as an 1.5 inch used to historically? And that's a lot of the stuff that's just not real well documented, and we don't see consistent returns on.
Well, it's gonna surprise you. I believe every time we've done cover crop like this before, especially multi-species, your pre-water requirement was not what you thought it was gonna be. The infiltration was so much better. Like that particular field there, the turnips are between 12 and 15 inches deep, and that's just the main root. And there's hair roots going on from that. And they're still, after we strip till, they're still standing upright, beginning to rot. So they're gonna have a heck of a channel to get that water down. The turnips are more shallow, but again, there's a lot of fine roots going out from them.
The radish.
The radish, yes, radish. And it's but every time I love the result after the cover crop. It's just the amount of water and resources you spend on it, making it pencil out, because it doesn't. usually. That's what.
And there are, there are opportunities, whether a guy wants to take government dollars or not, everybody's got a little bit of opinion on that, but it's all your tax dollars going back somewhere. So, but there are some good opportunities to take advantage of some programs to throw those cover crops in. Right now, and some of that will rank really well at, somewhere like the NRCS on those applications, but right now, I think that pay rate's somewhere around $70 an acre to throw that in, plant it, and grow it, on a 3-year program. And so I do some consulting work for national sorghum producers, helping them maintain what was a Climate Smart grant, and so having some exposure to how some other guys are doing some things. That's how they're getting some of those cover crops paid for. And in a lot of instances, working with the government can be a pain, but can be. Most instances, you got to play by their rules, do it their way by when. But that's a good avenue. Could be a good avenue if you haven't or you're thinking about it. You got 3 years of runtime there on some tax dollar dime.
I think the biggest
FYI,
question,
just a second, FYI, we will have somebody from NRCS, their head irrigation person.
Some of those
going over
programs
what
pay
funds are
better than
available.
farm and dry land the last couple of years.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
I think the big questions asked are, what's the goal with the crop? What's the goal with the cover crop? What's the trade-offs? And are you willing to invest those trade-offs to make it work?
For sure. That's a great point.
Yeah, because it's tough. If you're having to apply water, and if you work backwards, let's say, what's an acre inch worth? Well, think about it. If you're on corn production, you're talking basically 10 bushels. It's right around there. Well, 10 bushels, even at this environment, $40 in addition to the cost.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, this area to me is especially tough to figure out. Because you can see the infiltration deal, you can see the wind.
But it changes, just like this year, we had no winter,
Yeah.
Used to, we had some winters, and you need that winter to get everything kicked off.
In a lot of years, not only do you have that cost to put it in, the cost of the seed, but in a lot of years, you're going to have some sort of chemical on it as well.
Yeah.
In a lot of instances, if you're trying to be timely, do it the way you want to do it. So, from an economic standpoint, not near attractive, which I know is
No.
right up Steve's alley. So.
Well, the carbon credit, and as we get paid for those, the cover crops could become even more attractive though, because that's coming. I mean, if we've already got
Just takes
some
time to
stuff.
get there.
Yeah, it does. And we've been in a program for a while and we're beginning to see some benefit from it. But going in the future, I think it's gonna be more so. And, but the cover crop, I believe, will build your carbon.
It's, anytime you got something growing on top of that ground, it's taking that CO2 and pumping it into the soil for you. And how they're measuring that and how they work to get that accreditation, how they're getting how they get that market established. Obviously, not a priority for this administration, but we know future administrations, past administration, there's been a lot of incentive and dollars for that. And so, something to consider as well. At the end of the day, to some extent, you are carbon farming overall, whether you realize it or not.
Question whether there's a change in practices to qualify.
Mm-hmm.
More details.
Which is the opposite of way. A lot of those programs, they require you to show a change in practice when you implement that to be able to apply that on farm or get paid for that. But I think that's kind of the opposite way of how those groups should be looking at it. Everybody, folks that are already doing those things and have been doing them historically have done a lot more good from a carbon into the ground perspective than anybody that's looking to make a change. So hopefully we'll see some of that change as well over time.
Okay, any more questions? Yes.
So it was mentioned again and again today that one of the key factors in today, you gotta try and keep the same yields while lowering input costs, and that's gonna be the key to expanding your margins. Aside from fertilizer management, what would you guys recommend maybe being a sneaky factor on how to, managing those input costs?
Again, it's a little bit more out there because there's just not the data set. But what does it look like if we are feeding the biology versus feeding the crop? And can we feed the biology more economically than we can feed the crop? How do we, we have this tremendous asset in that soil. It wants to bring nutrients to the plant. It wants the root exudates. How do we manipulate it for our success better than what we have historically?
From a nutrient standpoint and a soil health standpoint, kind of this whole thing we're talking about, there's a load of organic and inorganic nutrients just sitting out there in a pool in our soil, but they're all tied up. They're not necessarily all plant available. And so what are some things we can do to help turn that loose? I don't know that there's really something I can pinpoint personally. Probably the best thing, most economically, you can hope for is a little bit of moisture. So, because that's, if you think about your seed, your chemical, and land rent, land payment, land lease, what's our next highest cost, Steve? It's irrigation, easily.
Oh, yeah.
So that's number 2, really, in a lot of instances. Sometimes number 1, depending on your agreement, your land paid for. So anything you can do, I think, from a moisture, to mitigate moisture leaving in any type of capacity, probably has more real value to you than you realize. And working on that, whether it's placement, timing, how, all the things you're going to be talking about, trash, all the above, put it in and get it where you want it when you want it, more of it on the ground, in the ground, is probably going to be, number 1 from an input perspective in my mind. So maybe those drops need to be lower, maybe that application needs to be different. Is probably the biggest thing guys could improve upon in this country, I think, personally.
Well, even just getting back to nutrition, if we look at sulfur, if we look at our micros and our interactions with those nutrients, are there some things we can do? Do we already have enough phosphorus in that soil, but we need to make it more available, to your point? So is that somewhere where the sulfur, the calcium, the micros help us to facilitate that? And is that a more economical way to go?
From a fertilizer side, anytime you can get some sulfur out in this part of the world, because we are a high pH, normally calcareous soil, anytime you can get some sulfur out at all, specifically in a band, is going to benefit you in more ways than you can realize from a nutrient release, nutrient tie-up standpoint, especially micronutrients and phosphorus.
Definitely. We try to put sulfur in starter is where I try to get it at the most, because it's right there, readily available, and you can do it for the least amount of dollars with the biggest bang for your buck, because it's right into the plant.
And it's buffering that strip, that root zone or that seedling situation. So, from an in-season perspective, that 2855 is a great product, but it does cause algae bloom in some instances. And once a guy's had a bloom, or not necessarily algae, bacterial bloom, once you've had a bloom, you won't ever use that product again. But if you hadn't had a problem so far, that 2855 is an excellent fertilizer product in season for going through the pivot.
One of the things on the equipment side, we're not on that. We will be in a couple of weeks, but a lot of people, we've found that we haven't done a really good job of it, but as I go through, the age of some of your application equipment, talking about regulators, nozzles,
Yep.
things of that nature, those are not as efficient as you feel like they are. A lot of times, especially if they've got any sort of age on them. And it hurts in the pocketbook to replace them, but it also hurts not to.
Makes a big difference not changing them, I guarantee you.
Yes.
Anything to get that water on the ground, in the ground. You don't want to see it anywhere else, in my opinion. If you see it anywhere else, you're just throwing money in the air.
Okay, one last question. Who wants it? Yeah.
So you said that the research into the microbes has not really been that delved into. Why is that?
There just wasn't the technology available to understand it. Like a term rhizophagy, where the biology is carrying nutrients into the plant roots, and then the plant's extracting those nutrients, releasing biology back into the soil. That was something that was theorized, I think, in the 70s or 80s, but they just now have the technology within the last 5 to 7 years to see the process work. So I think that's what's been the limiting factor on a lot of it, is we're dealing with such a microscopic level, and there's so many interactions and things that we just don't know, and more of it's coming to light with the technology advances.
You find too that there's so many different ways to analyze that.
Correct.
What's happening. And so you're reading it to tell you, and what this guy's reading it to tell him are two different things. Because there's no baselines on a lot of this.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
so
it's so new that there's no well-established footprint.
Yes, sir.
Yep.